You're on mute.
All right.
We are
Thank you.
recording.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the November 15th meeting of the Reinvestment and Workforce Committee. Start off by doing attendance. Corey Betts, Andre Comer, Avery Gaddis, Sabira Gordon, Andrea Hawkins, Michael Jefferson.
Present.
Jalanane, present. Paula Robertson, Kelly Marie Villeries, Valeries, present. Valeries, thank you. Kevin Walton.
Present.
And Shirley Skyers Thomas.
Present.
Thank you. So we do not have quorum, which means we will not be able to conduct any votes, but I'd like to get our meeting started. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes, which we cannot vote on. So we will move that to later if we do get a quorum. Otherwise, we will have to table it until the next meeting. I do also want to acknowledge staff members that have joined us for the meeting, and I believe we have some new faces. Kelly, do you want to introduce folks?
I would like to introduce Tiffany Arroyo. Did I pronounce that correctly, Tiffany?
It was close. Arugio.
Arugio. Tiffany has just joined the OWS team as our Workforce Cannabis Coordinator, and she will be working very closely with Ginny Ray's team at the Social Equity Council. She is starting off to review all of the workforce plans that our licensees have submitted, and will be starting at that point to move forward in helping them put together the programs that they need. I'd like to give Tiffany just a moment to introduce herself.
I'm looking forward to working with everyone. I've actually already hit the ground running. I've done 3 plans just this week. We're only on a Wednesday. And my background is I came from Department of Consumer Protection in the Drug Control Division. I was an analyst working on all product and branding registration. So I have these built relationships already with a lot of our producers and dispensaries, a lot of the existing licensee, I should say. And yes, and I'm just looking forward, and don't be a stranger. Please, send me a message. We could always grab lunch too.
Awesome. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Director Clay, do we have anyone else in your team that's new?
We don't have anyone else that's new, but you do have a quorum. Chairman Robertson joined us, as well as Councilmember Betts has joined us as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for recognizing that. So with them here, I would like to now entertain a motion for the approval of the September 20th and October 18th, the September 20th minutes.
So moved.
Have a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is just a reinvestment workforce update. We've already had the introduction to Tiffany, and I want to hand it over to Director Clay. She had shared with the committee yesterday evening a update that where we will first touch upon some of the lessons learned and best practices from this previous go around, and just make sure that we all have a conversation around those. Then we will dive into the reinvestment timeline that she has provided us in detail, and then want to wrap up the discussion with, looking at the next several months with the timeline in mind of what is the ultimate goal of the council, and having a conversation around that. So with that, Director Clay, I'll hand it over to you to walk us through the sort of best practices and lessons learned.
Okay, Vera, can you put up the slide for the best practices? I believe this was shared out to everyone, but I'll just pull it up for a visual. You're on mute, Vera.
I'm on it.
Okay. While she's putting that up, I'll just kind of talk about what I do remember and what I experienced. So the things that we learned about the grant making process is that this money is very, very much needed, wanted, and appreciated within the communities. We have been going out to the announcements of the grant awards. We've been meeting a lot of the organizations and individuals that have received grant funding, and they are thrilled, they are thankful, and they're very, very excited. So some of the other lessons that that we learned from the pilot is we need to provide, and we will provide, more guidance to the grant makers. There's a lot of questions that came up sort of after the fact. So there are things like, can we buy a van? You know, can we buy a bus? And so you know, we had to respond to those questions. And so even, you know, a little bit more criteria, but considering that this is a pilot, again, these were all the questions that we wanted, and the questions that and information that, you know, we would not have known until we put this money out there and put those applications out there. So the specific criteria, so we did find that there were some organizations that got lots of money, and then there were some organizations that didn't get so much. So you know, some organizations got 5,000, some organizations got over 200,000. So I think we should probably be doing a little bit more definition and criteria. Some large organizations got money. Remember, we left it to the locals to decide how the monies would be dispersed, which did leave out some of the more grassroots organizations that we were trying to target. So we are looking at doing a definition and a criteria for who all is eligible for our funding once we decide the directions that we're going to go. More technical assistance to the applicants. A lot of these folks are individuals, they're groups of people who who've come together, they're doing this stuff on their own. So giving them a little bit more help in writing their applications. Now, this is not something that we are going to do as a council, but we will put this on our grant makers to provide the technical assistance in some workshops prior to the application period. And all of that is actually worked into the timeline that we sent you out yesterday. So helping folks with the budgets and helping people with compliance. And this is all prior to making the applications. I think it will make their applications much stronger, especially those organizations that do not have a lot of resources. We want to extend, we'll be recommending that we extend the time that the grant makers have to spend the money. We got the money out the door, we got it out to them. The organizations that were applying had a very short time frame. They have until June of this year to spend the money, but once the money has been dispersed to the community, we should allow the community a little bit more time to kind of, not slow drip, but get the money out there, but give them a little bit more time, the organization's time to spend the money. We want to provide opportunities for the applicants to make presentations in addition to the written application. I know in my experience that I have reviewed applications, but then when I heard the applicant come and speak about their programs, I think it gives just an extra opportunity for folks to have a better understanding and to be able to ask questions as a committee. So we are recommending that the grant makers will allow for public presentations or applicant presentations to their committees before they deliberate on the applications. Limit the eligible number of applicants. Some organizations put in 5, 6, 7 applications, so we will probably be recommending that, and some of those 5, 6, 7 all got funded. So we want to make sure that, you know, the money is being spread around as much as possible. So probably recommending that we limit it to 1 application per organization, and limit the eligible applicants. So some, as I mentioned, some large organizations received grant funding, and some of our targeted audience we weren't. So we're looking at maybe capping the budget as a recommendation to make sure that the grassroots folks have every opportunity to receive these funds. And so also, I would recommend that we are, as a council, as my staff, that we are more involved in the process and understanding the process before it gets kicked off. So many of the grant makers had community review teams. All of them actually had community review teams, but some of the community review teams consisted of people who were applying for grants, and the plan there was to allow them to recuse themselves from their application, which is not, I don't think anywhere is a good idea. So we actually did not allow that. So that didn't happen. But we want to go through more and again, look at the process, have an opportunity to look at their process in a little bit more detail to make sure that those kinds of things are not popping up and popping in. So that's kind of the high level overview of the grant making process. I think the way that we're doing it is a very good process. It puts the money in the community and allows the community to have the decisions and really, really good input on how the money is being spent in their communities. So the other thing that I sent out to the members of the committee, and I actually sent it out to the entire council, is the reinvestment timeline.
Hey, Jerry, just
Yeah.
before we jump into the timeline, I just want to pause at the
Yep.
kind of, what we saw and what we learned in terms of process, and make sure if folks have any questions, comments, concerns, that we are addressing them. So I think I can see everyone, but feel free to raise your hand in case I can't see you. Councilman Jefferson.
Good afternoon, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your report, Jenny. Here's the thing. Question. When do you think you can have available your responses to some of those concerns? I don't think you can address every concern, but to some of those concerns, when do you think you can have a recommendation, I guess is the better way of putting it?
So everything that we've heard back from the public and that we've heard. So if you guys have heard things that you haven't shared with us, I won't be able to address those. But all of those things, if you look at the timeline that was sent out, all of those issues are addressed in the timeline, and there's time made within the timeline to address all of those. So there is a period of the public being able to speak on behalf of their applications. There's a time frame for the technical assistance to happen before the application period opens. So all grant makers will be required to follow that timeline and to provide those resources and information before the applications are received and or reviewed.
And I definitely think there should be a cap on the money. It's not that much money. This $34 million pot is going to get spread across the state. So it's not a lot of money, and no one should be receiving six figures like that. 200,000, that's over the top. And no one organization should be submitting more than one application. I am very supportive of collaboration, and I think that's something that we should all encourage in our respective communities. I certainly can. But for somebody to slip in 5 applications from one organization is utterly ridiculous. And we just have to just put an end to that right off the rip. There's some things we could just end and be done with it. Other things we just have to give it a little bit more thought. But my initial comments, and I thank you for giving us some time, the timeline to address some of those concerns. One last thing I just want to say, look, some organizations are just simply not ready to receive funds. I mean, we have to look at those organizations who have made a contribution, continue to make a contribution over a long period of time in our communities. This is not for those organizations that want to need seed money to get started. We want organizations who are up and running, doing some of the things for our community. If we have to teach you technical assistance, maybe you're just not ready to receive SEC funds. We have to look at those, or maybe you should collaborate with an organization that is up and running, that is qualified and ready to go out there and have been doing some of the work we want them to do. That's just a suggestion. To sit around and concern ourselves with that sort of stuff is, for me, I really don't think that's something that we should be involved in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Jefferson. I agree with you on all of those points. I think this is helpful to capture because these are things that we're going to need to spell out in the criteria, which, again, it was a pilot last time. So I think being more specific on what are the caps on amounts awarded and number of applications coming in, but also that we're looking for, existing more mature organizations, if that is a direction this council wants to go. Councilwoman Valeries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A suggestion that maybe there's a two-tier approval process whereby the community organizations are making recommendations to the Social Equity Council on who they believe should be funded through their process and a justification for why, and then the council being able to have the last word on what moves forward and maybe what doesn't. I don't know if that's something that the council might be interested in, but that could allow for some maybe economies of scale and being able to look at organizations that might be able to collaborate together and may not be looked at in the same way as the local grant makers might be looking at it.
Thank you. I know that is something we did propose in the pilot as well, and the concern I had heard from the council was, would it take too much time for then us to also have to approve it? Now, that said, we went through that process and we do, it does seem like it would be helpful for us to at least have visibility on it before those are inked, in case there are concerns that pop up. So Director Clay, when you bring forward the proposal on the process for reinvestment, I think it would be helpful for you to maybe provide an option or two on that piece so that we can discuss and decide on what makes most sense.
Okay.
Thank you. Additional questions, comments, concerns? Okay. So the only other, I think, thing that I had heard from folks in the community was just making sure that the grant makers that are pulling together review boards are being careful about who serves on those boards or those committees, and that there aren't conflicts of interest there. I know that's hard because usually those that are most passionate about wanting to engage in things like this are probably already rolling up their sleeves and doing work in the community. But I do think we need to make sure that we are clear on that in the RFP or whatever goes out to avoid any types of conflicts of those sorts.
Yeah, we did do our best to vet the community review teams, but we all are also putting together the criteria so that the grant makers will know who it should and should not be a part of the review team. And again, it's things like you can't be making an application and deciding on application. So those folks were not allowed. And in some cases, it caused the process to start over because they had to pick other individuals. But I agree, and we'll be providing more guidance on that as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think if there are no further questions on feedback that we've heard, we can move forward on the timeline.
So the timeline, I don't know if we're gonna put that up today and if you wanted to get into, but I wanted to send it out to you, and I color coded the timeline with the what those colors refer to. So again, all of what you see on the timeline that's the detailed timeline, that's the steps that we plan to take, the estimated timeline for certain things to happen. If the council decides to go with the grant makers, you'll see that the grant maker timeframe's there, and the council will just need to approve that process or that timeline itself. The same thing with these next rounds of community conversations and the updates to the actual reinvestment plan. So if everyone is in agreement with moving forward, and a lot of it will have to do with, again, what we decide we're going to go, and I believe it's at the next meeting that we'll have that update to the reinvestment plan for you all to make some determinations, and we'll have some recommendations for you.
I do have a question, but before I dive into mine, I'll open it up. I'm not sure if folks have had a chance to look through the timeline that was shared out. But before we kind of dive into that, I know we have Council Member Shirley as a guest today, so I will turn it to him.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question about the grant makers going forward, is it the plan for the committee or the staff to add additional grant makers? And if so, how will that be? How will they be selected, or have you thought through how you're going to select them at this point?
Through you, Madam Chair. So we have thought about, and we will need more grant makers. We're talking now about, a much bigger pot of money that will be going out statewide. So we will most definitely need other grant makers. So we'll do another RFQ, and we'll be interviewing other opportunities and other partners throughout the state.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Councilman Walton.
Yes, good afternoon. Jenny, thanks for the timeline. So I just need some, I think you mentioned it. I just want to be clear that, so this next round that we're talking about now, who is eligible for to apply?
We
So
won't know.
if I just may, this part of the timeline is for Director Clay and staff to come back to us in December with that criteria for us to discuss. So we haven't gotten there yet. Is that correct, Director Clay?
That is correct. We are going through the community conversation, so we're still waiting to wrap those up and get that feedback before we put together our final recommendations.
Wait, so what, all right, I may be a little confused about that. Can you say that again, Madam Chair?
So per the timeline that was shared out last night, Director Clay and staff are coming back to the Reinvestment Committee in our December 20th meeting to share the proposal for the reinvestment for this coming year. And so that will include the things that we want to address in terms of what we've learned, as well as the criteria and who we will be targeting to disperse this money to.
Okay, maybe I wasn't clear. I apologize. I mean, in terms of who's eligible to apply, is that statewide in all DIAs?
Yes, it's
Okay.
the DIA communities.
Okay, I just want to be sure because, and looking at this, the timeline, I just wasn't sure how this was reading. So thank you for that.
I don't see any other hands up. I did have a question and more so just wanting to make sure that Director Clay, you and your team are being set up for success with the realities of the holidays coming up. I do think it makes a lot of sense to have the first that proposal on December 20th. I am a little concerned if we'll have a quorum of this group to be able to discuss and get enough feedback on that in case there are any changes that you need to make. And then also making sure that you have enough time between the 20th and the January 9th meeting to be able to update, address those challenges and whatnot. Want to respect that we've got the holidays in between, and I do not want to see you working on Christmas. So I think the timeline as it stands right now is very aggressive, and it does make sure that we have, I believe, sort of the grant makers in place by the end of March, if I am correct.
Yeah, I don't have the actual. I do have it in front of me. Yes.
So it does still give us a little bit of wiggle room, right? Because ideally, we just need to have those grant makers in place and the money out into those communities by the end of June. So I would just recommend maybe think on that in case you want to build in a little bit more time so that you do have the time to be able to meet these deadlines and not have to rush or scramble because they are very tight. So that's just one thought I had. It would still ensure that we are hitting the ultimate deadlines and getting the money out the door, before the end of the fiscal year. Councilman Jefferson.
Madam Chair, through you, I think that's a good point. The other thing I would raise is this, that I think we don't have to do a universal approval. I think approval is the word I was looking for. If those DIAs that have grant makers that are qualified and ready to go, I think we should look at it on a case-by-case basis. And if they're ready to go, we should look at those individual grant makers and say, okay, you're ready to go. here's the SEC's decision about the money you are to receive. Once we make a determination as to who's going to receive funds and how those funds are going to be disseminated, then and of course that has to come first. So there has to be some place on that timeline where we decide how we are going to divide up the funds, right? And then once we get there, I don't think we have to wait for every single grant maker to be in place before dispersing the funds. That's just something I'm offering. Unlike the pilot where we agreed and we went, it was almost universal, Jenny, if I'm correct, that everybody basically was approved at the same time or in one meeting or something like that, and then we gave out the money. I just think because the pot is so much bigger this time around, it's not a pilot, we might want to reconsider how we disperse the funds. That's just a suggestion.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilman Walton?
Yes, and so I think the timeline again is something that we can control. But in going back to this last round, is there a way that the Attorney General's office, the person who executes the contract, would be in alignment with this, so we won't have an issue where there's a delay in funds getting out the door? And how do we that?
Yep. And through you, Madam Chair. So remember, this contract that we did for the pilot had to be created. Nothing we do is already in place. We have to create everything. The template is complete. So going forward, we should have no issues with getting the grants out the door and the contract signed because they're already in place. That the templates have been approved, and now it's just updating them. And it takes about 3 weeks for the AG to approve contracts. And we've worked that into the timeline as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece, and I know we're going to get into this as we talk about goals, but per this timeline, the expectation is that the community organizations will make their decisions before June 30th. And based on the timeline that we had for the pilot, where I believe the contracts were signed in June and then disbursement is happening now in November. It feels a little tight to me. They had about 5 months to kind of complete the process. In this, they've got about 3 months. So we might want to consider, because once the money is out the door, we're not worried about,
Right.
that piece of it. We might want to consider giving them more time so that they can do it, well. And maybe that's something that that piece of it, which is once we've done our job of dispersing the funds to the grant makers, we might want to consider asking them to come to us with some sort of timeline on what they're thinking. That still fits within a agreeable window, so it's not like they're waiting till the following calendar year. But this does feel very tight, and I don't want potential grant makers to shy away from applying because they feel like it might be too constrictive of a timeline.
Mm-hmm. And the timeline reflects the current process. So our recommendations are going to be that once the grant makers have the money, that they have more time, so that they might be rounds of funding that they do. So they might say, okay, programs that are going to, happen within the next 3 to 6 months, you apply now. So we're asking that we grant them more time to spend the money, maybe up to 24 months, 18 months, to get all the money out the door and give those programs time to spend the dollars.
It might be helpful to pull that piece out and have that additional, what you're thinking in terms of amount of time that they have to spend it reflected. And then it would, I'm assuming that you guys pulled this out of an Excel sheet, it would be helpful to pull out. I appreciate that you color coded them because it is more easier to follow kind of the different 5 pieces. But if we could maybe have a document where each piece has its own timeline separate so that we can understand it that would be really helpful.
Yeah, we have that ready to go. That's why we wanted, like I said, just did the big one and then we break out the others. That's why we color coded it. And then as the council makes decisions going forward, we will be adjusting the timeline.
Great, thank you. Did we have additional questions, comments? No? Okay. So
And can I
just wanna-
just, yeah, can I just ask if any members of the committee or members of the council that are present today, if you have any thoughts and ideas or suggestions, so please send them to us. If you've heard things from the public, please shoot us a quick email so that we can take those things into consideration, because we can't consider or make recommendations on things that we don't know about.
Jenny, in saying that, I just want to offer one, and I'll send you a couple of things. I was at a community forum the other night held by Next Level, and there was a lot of talk. A lot of folks are doing things around food insecurity, and that's a passion of mine. And I would hope that a lot of churches are doing some wonderful work in that area. It's not enough food banks to go around, and that's something that we should consider this time, certainly given to those type of entities. That's just one. And I love your idea of allowing the council members to offer their thoughts, so that in terms of what needs should be met. We're all from, or around the corner from a DIA, and would have some sense of what the needs are. So without belaboring the point, I know we want to move on. So that's my thought.
Thank you. Councilman Walton?
Yes, thank you. My final thought would be, as we move forward, and we're doing any sort of community, is there an opportunity for folks who are speaking on our behalf, in this case, grant makers, to maybe have a some type of speech ready or prepared statements in terms of what it is that we might be looking for? Because I attended a couple of meetings, and it gets to be kind of folks sharing their ideas, which are great, because as Councilman Jefferson said, there are lots of grassroots organizations in New Haven, especially our churches, doing great work. However, it may be beneficial to the grant makers that they have an idea of what it is that we might be looking for, so we have a consistent message across the state to folks who are hearing. Because if the conversations in other communities are based on what happened in New Haven, then I imagine there are mixed messages going out. So if there's an opportunity for at least for folks in your office to talk to those folks as they share any type of message in the community.
Sure.
And we do have the Q&A that you guys had put together for the previous round. That's a good starting point, though I know things might change. It's something to look at. Okay. Great. So then the third piece on the slide that Director Clay had shared was sort of what is the goal of the council? And I think that question came from a conversation she and I had around, we've sort of addressed it already, but I will just put it out there for clarification. I know we want to make sure that we are getting the money out the door before anything else can happen with it. And I think we're all clear and aligned on that one. But we also, I think the question she had for me and for the council was, is our concern also making sure that we get the money, dispersed through the grant makers as soon as possible as well? Or are we comfortable with saying, okay, we'll give you, up to 12 or 24 months as an organization that's receiving these to be able to use the funding? I know we've touched on that briefly, and I haven't heard anyone jump up in response to that, but I do want to just flag that as something that we, I think would be good to have clarity on, so that we can include it in the scope. Councilwoman Valories.
And I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to this question, but in the application process for the grant funding, are those entities not being very clear and concise about what they're going to do with the funding and what their project is and their timelines? Because if it is, then there really shouldn't be a delay of the grant maker getting the funding to them, because they already have their clearly defined project in place. And if not, do we give the grant makers more time to collect the applications so that the grantees who are actually going to be implementing the programs have more time to put together their proposals so that those projects can be launched as soon as possible?
Yep, those are good questions. So I know that from what I looked at the applications that came in, it looked like they were pretty comprehensive in terms of having, the plan and timeline there, but that is something that, we can make sure we have as a requested piece of this, in the process. I think it's also more around, I believe last time, we said that the grant making organizations must disperse the money before the end of the calendar year. And the grant, the organizations that are receiving it, must spend it, within 12 months. Is that correct, Director Clay?
We gave them until June 30th to spend the money. And one of the big concerns in the community was that, so right now, the way that the timeline works is the announcements of those grant recipients are being made now. They're entering into contract with them. So these folks will probably get their money in the next couple of weeks. So let's say they get their money December 1st. They have to spend the money by June 30th. It did not take into consideration any summer programs. So only thing that was able to get funded now are any programs that may be after school or spring programs, but no allowance for summer. So that was one of the big issues. But those organizations, they absolutely can spend that money, and that I believe they will spend that money by June 30th. But the next round will give people an opportunity now for summer programs for youth and or other groups.
So maybe one way of addressing that is to say 12 months from date of contract signed or funds received or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point, Madam Chair. Because a lot of these groups, I'm sorry. I just see a lot of the groups do provide services in the summertime for children. I mean, that's the initial goal was we focused on reentry and youth programming. And because the money came out so late, a lot of the folks who provide those services have to wait for an additional summer in order to apply those funds. So I think it's unfair to say they have to spend it by June 30th. Maybe we can tweak it a bit.
Well, through you, Madam Chair, and Councilwoman Valeries. So what we suggested to the grant makers is that if people had summer programs, that they pay for the programs in June. It's June 30th. The next is July 1st is is kind of the summertime. So just make sure that there were camperships or program, pay for it before June 30th. And that would allow kids to go to camp or to participate because it's already taken care of. So some organizations were able to do that, some were not.
Thank you. Councilwoman Valeries?
So I may suggest that in the RFP that people provide a timeline of when they feel they're going to be spending the money, and that's part of the evaluation process. Actually, you do need to give them a date by which, but I agree that the longer you give them, you don't want to give them, 2 years to spend $5,000,
Right.
but it's appropriate for them to have a timeline for when their project will be completed by within a reasonable time frame, no later than say. And that way, some people are going to need a summer to launch their program, and others may not, and others may have a fall program. So it gives them the ability to have different lengths of time in order to complete their project with a no later than date. And it's part of the evaluation process of when they're going to be, like I said, you don't want them to hold on to $5,000 for 2 years. But it might take them, they're going to use that $5,000 for something very specific that's going to happen at a certain time within the calendar year. And you say, okay, yes, that's an appropriate use of the funds for that particular event at that time. And that's part of the evaluation process, instead of putting an artificial deadline onto something.
Mm-hmm. So through you, Madam Chair, so one of the things that we were suggesting is, so let's say one of the grant makers gets, let's say they get $3 million. Would they have, and we will make the recommendation that if they decide that they would like to do like a rolling application, so that, or they're going to do like, tranches. So they'll say in the first round, we're going to have this, these types of grants made available. So that round happens, and then 2 months from then, there's another round because now it's going to coincide with fall programming. And so they want to take care of the summer program, then they'll take care of the fall program, then they'll take care of the spring program. So when I say that give them more time to spend, that they be allowed to do that. So, but the programs will not have 24 months. The programs will have 12 months or a year from the date that they receive their notice of award to spend the funds.
That's a good idea.
Great.
That's a good idea.
Any additional questions? Comments? Councilman Shirley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just point of clarification. Is there a difference between what you're saying is spending versus commitment? So I could see how, a grant recipient might be able to commit funds to a particular project. The project might not, some of the funding might not take place until some point in the future, but the commitment will allow the person to actually get the project started. So just consider that, if you would.
Oh, so you mean like some pre-work? So if someone needs to do, I don't know, let's say renderings, if we're just, I'm just saying it's not a great example, but if we're gonna put money up for renderings, but the project is not gonna happen until they secure other funding, do you mean something like that?
Not necessarily conditional, but because I think that would be kind of conditional. But no, I'm saying if the project is in place, there's some spending that will necessarily take place at a point in the future, but in order for it to go forward, the commitment has to be done now.
Okay.
So I'm
Yeah,
just suggesting that you might see a project where a commitment is required today. The spending might not take place for 7 or 8 months later.
I think on a case-by-case basis, we would consider what that project might be.
Sure.
Any other additional questions? Okay. Well, I think we are good then on the timeline, Director Clay. I would just ask that if you have if you do want to make any changes in taking into consideration the tight timeline between December and January, please update that and then send the final timeline over, both as like a full timeline as well as the individual broken out ones, to the full council. We can review it at our next council meeting as well. But again, just want to make sure we have something that we're able to look back to in terms of where we stand.
Okay, I just want to make a note that the timeline will be a proposed timeline until the council votes on its process going forward and all of the other things were taken into consideration, the reinvestment plan. So it will be a proposed, because as the council continues to make decisions, the calendar will be affected, or the timeline will be affected. So you'll have a proposed until you make all final decisions, and then you'll have a final timeline.
At what point, and what's the final decision that we need a final timeline for?
That's going to come through excuse me, Madam Chair, through you, if I may.
Well, I want to know the question I asked Director Clay first. What is the final decision that you're looking for to get
So
an approved timeline?
When the reinvestment plan is approved by the council, then we will incorporate the timeline to reflect the final approvals.
Got it. So you're saying in case we don't approve the timeline on the date or the plan on the dates that are listed here, that will push things out.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, say the council decides it's not going to go with grant makers. That's going to affect the timeline, because whatever it is, we'd have to come up with another timeline and another process. It's not likely it's going to happen, but I'm just saying that if anything changes drastically because of unforeseens, the timeline could be affected. Right now, I'm good with that. We may make some tweaks to it as we go back and look at holidays and other things.
Yep.
But that's it for us right now. So until
So,
we,
so if I kind of break it up, there's a timeline up until the, reinvestment draft is presented to the council for approval. And then there's everything that gets kicked in once it's been
Right.
approved.
correct.
But I'm guessing the amount of time in between those things will remain pretty much the same. It's just dates might change if we end up pushing it out. So, but at the very least, we can say the timeline that you will, if you choose to make updates to it, that you will send us from now until we have, in December or whatever it is when we end up voting on this, what is what we should be expecting from you to stay on top of.
Yes.
Okay, great. I just want to clarify that. Thank you. Councilman Jefferson.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I think the executive director is looking for reinvestment and workforce to take action, and the sooner the better, so we can solidify the timeline and move forward. And then we don't have to worry about making unnecessary adjustments down the road. I think that's the idea. So we need to finalize the timeline. Reinvestment, this is on reinvestment and workforce development.
I'm gonna pause there because I think Director Clay just said she needs to present us the plan first for us to vote on it. So
That's what I'm saying. So
yeah,
but we constantly receive these timelines and we're asking questions about the timeline. I thought the timeline was great the last time I saw the timeline that was presented. I thought we should have moved on it, but others felt differently, and I respect that. So I'm saying we shouldn't waste too much time. Let's get a timeline in place that we could present to the full council, certainly by the next meeting. I don't think that's asking much. And if we have to tweak it, we can tweak it accordingly. But let's have a framework in terms of a timeline in place, at least by the next meeting. I don't think that's a lot to ask.
I think you and I are
Well,
saying the same thing. I think you and I are saying the same thing, which is why
Yeah.
I like this timeline. I just want to make sure she's comfortable with it because I do think it's tight. And again, if that's what we're going to hold expectations to, I want to make sure that they're fair. And so if there are tweaks that come out of it, great. Next, reinvestment committee meeting, we will be reviewing the draft of the reinvestment proposal that will then go to the council to be voted on. And then, we move forward with this timeline in mind, barring no changes. So I think we're
Madam
in
Chair,
agreement.
is it possible for reinvestment to meet before the next scheduled council meeting? And
I don't know if Director Clay will, I mean, we're putting more pressure on her to then have the proposal ready sooner.
which
Yeah,
proposal are we talking about? So I'm not confused with what you're
The
saying. I'm talking about
reinvestment plan, the proposal for the reinvestment plan that's going to outline what is the criteria, who do we want this money to go to, what is the process going to look like, what's the RFP for the grant makers going to look like, what are the criteria and parameters that we are putting in place that we've discussed earlier today, all of that stuff. That's a lot of stuff. So again, this is why I said, even if she gets that to us between now and December 20th, it's a lot to pull together.
So what I am planning to present to you on the 20th, December 20th, is a proposed spending plan. So, and then everything else, if you agree to the spending plan, everything else will fall into place. I won't have the process, and it's kind of done already, but we've already gone through a process of selecting grant makers. So we'll tweak that based on the fact that we're going to go with third-party grant makers. So we'll tweak what we know about that RFQ, and then we'll put that out. So but you will say to us, okay, yes, we want to go with, in this spending plan, we're going to go with a third-party grant maker, make that happen. So we will make that happen.
But we do expect that you will bring us the criteria and parameters for reinvestment as part of this
Yes,
spending plan.
we will.
And
Yes.
that's the most important thing that I think we've spent most time discussing today, which should outline, what are the areas of focus that we want this money to go towards? What are the restrictions in terms of, how much time they have to spend and all that kind of stuff? Any other restrictions on like only one, for example, one, grant per organization and that kind of stuff, whatever our caps are going to be on, no organization gets more than X number of dollars or, that kind of stuff, I think needs to be part of that spending plan. I think we all need to be comfortable with that and agree on that
Yes.
before we can give you the green light. So
Yep, you will get that. And then the NOFA part is the other part. Just putting the notice out there, but the criteria will be presented, recommendations, and your approvals will
So Councilman Jefferson was asking if we should move the meeting sooner than that, and I would turn to you, Director Clay, because you've got about a month, recognizing you've got the Thanksgiving holiday in between. Moving it sooner, I just want to respect that, make sure you and your team have enough time to pull all those things together.
Yeah, I would ask.
I'm sorry. I just, maybe I was speaking about the timeline itself, not necessarily the reinvestment plan. I just wanted to have a timeline in place. But I understand we have to vote on the reinvestment plan. Are we, so is this a day, the timeline is independent of the reinvestment plan, but we don't have to vote on a timeline, do we?
So we don't have to vote on the timeline, but I just want to be clear that the timeline reflects the expectations being set by the executive director and staff on when the council can expect to see things happening. So that's all. That's all it is. I don't think we need to vote on it. I completely understand that. If for some
Okay.
reason we don't come to agreement on the January 7th meeting, which is how it's proposed right now, on the reinvestment plan and spending plan and all that, then the rest of the timeline needs to get shifted out too. But overall, what's been put in place here in terms of, okay, we're gonna have between when this thing happens and this thing happens, there's gonna be 3 weeks, right? That's the important pieces, which I think makes sense to me. And again, advise you to just take one more look and make sure that it's doable, it's manageable, and setting you guys up for success, because it is very tight and it is very aggressive. And I want to make sure with everything else that will be going on, both during the holidays, but also reinvestment isn't the only thing you guys are focusing in on, just to make sure that you all have the time you need to do this well.
Yeah, we will take another look at it, and any tweaks that we make to it, we will present to the council. But we also have new people that started, so they don't get vacation time. So nobody's taking
Well,
time
at
off
least-
during.
At least the actual holiday will be off, and hopefully no one will be working on that day. So and then moving forward, Councilman Jefferson, to your point, whatever timeline Director Clay sends, if she chooses to update, whatever she sends over to us will be what is, final in terms of from now until we see the plan, and then, whatever's after the plan will go into place as well.
Okay. We're good.
Great. Any other questions? All right. If not, now that I've lost the agenda, I think that was the last item. So item 5 on the agenda is anything for the good of the order. If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move,
Do you have a second?
unless you guys want to stay here. Can we get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in
We're all
favor.
in favor,
So
I
everyone's in
take it.
favor. Thank you,
Aye.
guys. This was a very productive
Aye.
meeting. Appreciate
Aye.
all the engagement. Take care.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Nice
Thank
work,
you.
Chairman.
Appreciate it.